You can reinvent yourself and completely change your life if you apply what I'm about to tell you. I've built 3 companies, over $100 million in revenue each. And I've had to reinvent myself multiple times to get there. So these are 4 strategies you can use to reinvent yourself at any age, no matter where you're starting from. Strategy number 1 is identity evolution. Elon Musk started with PayPal, sold that, and then invented Tesla, SpaceX, and drone satellites that fly all over the world. The guy just continues to reinvent who he is, what he does, the things he builds multiple times over decades. Now, here's the thing. I was able to achieve not quite that kind of success, but similar from the standpoint that I had to discover the main principle behind reinventing myself. When I was 18 years old, my high school peers voted me least likely to succeed. That label could have stuck with me forever. But instead, I decided to leave Oregon at 18 and move to Atlanta, Georgia, and then become an outside sales rep and go visit businesses. And I went from making $25,000 a year to over $150,000 a year by age 22 as a top salesperson. At 27, I decided to start my first company. By 30, I was a multi-millionaire. The problem was by 32, I was back to not being worth multi-millions, and I had to start over again. Now here's the thing. You're trying to prove yourself and take care of yourself, and you do that through your 20s. By your 30s, maybe you start a family and you get married and you have kids and you elevate in your career until you become adult in your 40s, really looking at what's next and how do I leave working in a company and maybe become a millionaire and be self-controlling of your future. What's cool about right now, though, is I'm seeing people to choose that earlier in life. So if you want to create real wealth, if you want to reinvent yourself again, if you want to do things different tomorrow than you're doing today, the truth is that's what most successful people actually do. They continuously and constantly reinvent themselves to leverage into the opportunities in the marketplace today that maybe they didn't recognize or weren't there yesterday. Things like AI, things like buying small businesses, things like learning to develop a sales agency, things that everyone needs to have help with, but nobody is really good at doing it. Now, here's the thing. The roles you've outgrown, the labels people gave you, like the ones they gave me, the version of yourself that got you here will not be the version that elevates you to the opportunities the marketplace has for creating wealth and value. If you have to evolve your identity, reinvention requires you to make yourself bigger. It's not your ego. It's in the scope of what you're chasing. Bigger thinking, bigger actions, bigger impact. That's what allows you to evolve from where you're at today, your current stage of life, to what the opportunity actually is. So here's what I'd like you to do. Ask yourself right now, what outdated identity are you holding on to? What label or role that somebody else gave you that you've entirely outgrown? Write it down. Then decide who you need to become next. Here's the thing. If you think I'm too old to change, in my mind is a stupid comment. It's self-limiting to think you're too young or you're too old. Let me give you a real life example. We have 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds that now have $10 and $20 million businesses. We have 70-year-olds that have compoundedly made a few $1 million to $10 million in such a short window of time because they figured something out. If you're gonna be the new version of yourself and take advantage of the new opportunities, you need to stop thinking like the older version of yourself. You need to have the right information from the right people that allow you to do the right things faster. And this is how you actually pull time and money forward so you can get money to go to work for you over time. And this is the secret that the wealthy have figured out. Now, the more experience you have in doing this, the more wisdom you'll accumulate in how to do it bigger, better, and faster. So look, age should work as a fuel, not a deterrent. Next is strategic targeting. When I was 22 years old, I was making $150,000 a year as a top salesperson, but I knew I wanted more. So I asked myself, who's already where I want to be? I started paying attention to the best performers around me, the people doing the most. I'd ask them a lot of questions about how they did it. How did they improve? How did they learn? How did they actually get there? What did you do differently than everyone else to separate yourself from the pack? And what mistakes would you avoid if you could start over that you maybe made? And I would model exactly what they did. I realized the hack to success wasn't trial and error. It wasn't reinventing the wheel. It was finding somebody who had already done what I wanted to do. And I learned what they knew. And I did what they did. The same is true for people like Steve Jobs. He lost Apple and got fired from his own company. He went and started Pixar, created a whole different business. It was worth so much money. And then he came back to Apple and completely reinvented Apple. He also reinvented himself multiple times by picking targets and finding people who knew what he needed to learn in order to become successful. Then look at somebody like Jeff Bezos. He bought a little tiny bookstore in Portland, Oregon. I remember because I lived in Portland. I actually worked right up the street from that little Howell's bookstore. And I thought, what is this guy doing? It's like in a bad part of town. Who would ever want to go get books there? Little did I know he had a much bigger vision, which turned into Amazon. But Amazon has reinvented what and who Amazon is multiple times. He went from buying what I thought was a little crappy bookstore up the street in Portland, Oregon, to selling books online, to actual logistics, to cloud servers, to distribution networks, to health companies. I mean, he has reinvented the whole gap between a consumer purchasing anything from anyone and having it delivered to their front door, irrespective of what that is, to now being a complete technological company with the biggest data set in the planet with purchasing power. It's crazy. But see, reinvention isn't about aimless change. It's about strategic vision and, more importantly, strategic targeting. You have to know exactly where you want to go, personally, professionally, financially. And then you need to find someone who's already been there. John Maxwell, a very dear friend of mine and mentor for years of mine, talks about this in his leadership principles. Specifically, he says you can't hit a target you can't see. So the better you have a mental image of what your stated objective looks like, the faster you can move to target. Pick your target right now. Who do you want to become? Then find the closest example of that person. Study their path, learn their strategies, model and mimic their behaviors until you can master them, and then commit to doing what they've already done. Now, here's the beautiful thing. Once you master it, you can modify it and even do it bigger, better, and faster. This brings us to number 3, the migration process. When I got my first sales job in Portland, Oregon, selling hearing aids over the phone, I sucked at the beginning. I didn't know what I was doing. I was terrified. I came up with a million excuses when I'd show up to work. Why not to make the phone call? Like, oh, I need to learn something. I need to put information somewhere. I need to find information, because I was actually petrified to get on the phone and have to talk to somebody. I was so uncomfortable. How did I change that? Well, I would record my sales calls at the office, and then I would go home and I would listen to the sales calls, and I'd actually practice in the mirror doing my pitch as I was talking to the other person until I got super comfortable being able to look at myself in the mirror, say the right things, and it sounded good. Because before that, I was totally insecure about how I sounded. Here's the magic. I kept doing it over and over and over until I became great at it. And here's the thing. It was horribly clunky at first. Once I got good, I would literally go back and look at how I used to do it, and it was a disaster. But how do you move from sounding like a disaster to actually becoming a master? I kept paying attention to what worked, and I stopped doing what didn't work. I'd make tiny little adjustments over time, how I asked the questions, how I presented the product, and opportunity. Those little changes compounded over time. I broke that whole process into a third. I started measuring what I said, how I said it, the questions I asked, and the results I'd get to move to the next section, and then who would actually write that check. And eventually, I became the #1 salesperson in doing this. In fact, I was generating as much as sales in one day that some people were doing all week. Now, most people expect reinvention to be dramatic, to be overnight, to have these massive breakthroughs. Here's the truth. It's not. It's a micro migration into beingness. It's these little incremental changes that you're paying attention to and that you're deploying, even though they might be clunky or not perfectly work at first. Over time, they'll compound, and that creates this massive momentum that builds confidence. And as you build confidence, all of a sudden you'll be like, people are saying yes faster. Now you can learn something new with every single phone call, every single interaction, every single day. And you can't stay being who you were because you start to expect to become something bigger, better, more valuable, and more impactful. Here's the big picture. When you master that for yourself, you actually have a complete program to teach other people how to do it. And if you want to know how to become wealthy for yourself, making a lot of money, to driving a huge net worth, it's teaching dozens of other people to do what you learned to do because you paid attention to those little tiny elements. So here it is. Commit yourself to 1% progress every single day towards your stated objective and target. Set daily, weekly, and monthly goals that move you closer to who you're becoming. Track your progress, adjust what's not working, and don't stop until you hit the target. That's how you migrate from who you are today and what you're doing today to what the true potential of who you can become tomorrow. And the last strategy is environmental engineering. When I was 26 years old and building my first business, I used to play golf with my buddies from my hometown on the weekends. We'd talk about sports, grab drinks, have our cigars, have a great time. But at some point, I realized I wasn't learning anything from that particular group. So I started going to business conferences and industry events and finding mentors who had done what I wanted to do. And you know what happened? Oddly enough, some of my golf buddies got uncomfortable with the growth I was going through. They didn't want to hear about the successful people I had met, spent time with. They didn't want to hear about the strategies I was learning. But I had to make a choice. And when I sat with top performers at these events running 10, 50, $100 million businesses, the conversations I was having were entirely and extremely different. We weren't talking about last weekend's game. We weren't talking about the brand name on the cigars. We weren't talking about the alcohol we were interested in drinking. We were talking about deals. We were talking about how to grow and scale companies. We were talking about how to raise capital. I mean, things that I never talked to my golf buddies about. I remember meeting Grant Cardone at one of his 10X growth conferences. I didn't ask for a picture or a photo. When I walked up to him, I said, "Hey, Grant, it's great to meet you. I was really looking forward to it, and I've seen all the amazing things you've done. And I believe by working together, we might be able to add a couple $2 billion to each other's net worth." He looked at me and he said, "Nice to meet you." I got his attention because I wasn't approaching him being interested in taking a picture of who he was or what he did. I was interested in what we could do together. I was approaching him as a peer who could solve problems together because I wanted to send a message that we were really super serious about business. That was another evolution for me, changing who I was to become somebody different. I was the CEO and founder of a company I sold for $151 million. I was a guy that within 3 years of doing that took $1 billion business with a group of people to $4.5 billion. Now here I was with Grant Cardone starting entirely over, willing to put his name on a new company that I knew would be worth billions of dollars. I actually in that moment had to be willing to reinvent even my own ego because despite what I had done, I was the one that had the idea with my wife to put his name on our company. I was able to do this because I changed who I spent my time with. If you're in the exact same environment that you were yesterday, you will not move to a different environment tomorrow, because you're probably not going to change much if you're still doing the same thing you've always been doing. And if you're around the same people, having the same conversations, doing the exact same things, everyone around you starts setting those limitations with you, telling you why the other things, the things you might start talking about, can't be done. They'll literally act like gravity and pull you back to being comfortable and settling for what you had. And John Maxwell actually talks about this as well in Law of the Lid. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I mean, for example, if you're a 5-level leader, operator, wealthy person, you're probably surrounded by 3s and 2s. 8-level leader or 9-level leader, you're going to give capacity to be surrounded by 7s, 8s. But if you're a level 5 or 6 leader and you don't find a level 10 leader, you'll stay level 5. It's all about the ability to pull yourself up and then bring people with you. If you want to accomplish that, you have to audit your circle right now and audit what you're doing. The 5 people you're spending your time with and what you're doing with them. Then go look at people you want to become like, who they're spending their time with. If those people and your own decisions relative to those people are holding you back, you can't be disappointed or upset if you move away from them, because you gravitate to who you want to become and the people who are doing and have done what you want to become. You don't have to treat people poorly. That's not what I'm saying. You don't have to write off people in your life. You don't have to be rude. You don't have to express to them you're not going to spend time with them. It's you gravitating to who your future self is going to be by mastering, and mimicking those that you emulate to become who you want to become tomorrow. What you need to do is go find those bigger, better, real-life examples. Reposition yourself for the future, because the future needs you, and it is waiting for you. The reality is, you can totally reinvent yourself at any age. I know this because I've had to do it multiple times to become where I'm at today. And I know if I can do it, you can do it. If you want to see how I went from working a 9-to-5 job to becoming a multimillionaire and soon billionaire entrepreneur, check out my next video right here.